Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Microsoft Flight Simulator, and today we are continuing with the new installation process on Windows 10, and we are going to be searching for my best FPS. Now I'm going to be doing some very detailed changes to the simulator, and then at the end doing sort of a broad spectrum change to the simulator. I want to make sure that if you have the intent of following the steps in this video, be sure to watch the before and after first, as many of the changes that I make, especially in Windows, have little or no effect, unfortunately. So you might find yourself a little surprised at some of the changes and the lack of effect it actually has on performance. With that in mind, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let's get started. If you are interested in acquiring any of my Overkill's tutorial guides for Microsoft Flight Simulator, please consider joining me on Patreon. Patreon subscribers level tier 2 and above have access to all of my guides, as well as any future updates and future guides that will be coming down the road. Link to Patreon can be found in the description below. All right, you guys, so as I said, today we are jumping into FPS. There are quite a few things that I like to change and adjust, and let me give you the breakdown of where we're at. Obviously, we're sitting the TBM 930. I've chosen the TBM 930 because it's sort of in the middle. It's not as frame rate demanding as, say, the A32NX, which is by far the worst, but it makes sense. Okay, it takes a pounding, but it's not the easiest. Okay, it's not like a Cessna or even like the Just Flight Aero. I find the TBM 930 to be right about in the middle, and I think it's the 3 LCDs and the 2 touchscreen controls that really are what pound it out, right? So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you there are 2 settings that I have already disabled, but other than that, everything is exactly as I left it, or as it was before, which is stock. You can see render scaling still at 100%. For those of you who've seen me in the past, I normally run about 90 to 80 at 4K. Right now it's still in default. So the only 2 things, we are on ultra settings except for 2 things. That is motion blur and depth of field. Depth of field, I don't enjoy it. I just think it, I really, honestly, let me back that up. It's not that I don't enjoy it. I don't really see it. I mean, just being blunt. And the motion blur, I don't like it. And motion blur, that is not a shot at Asobo or anybody else. I have not found a single simulator that I enjoy motion blur in. I don't like the way it's implemented. And I think it's just the monitor. I don't know. Call me crazy. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do here now is we are also sitting at JFK in New York. We've got a baseline going here. We're holding at about 28 frames per second. Obviously, that is totally not cool. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to jump into Windows, make a few changes there, then come back in the sim and see where we're at. All right, guys? So let's get after it. All right, so jumping into Windows. Now, guys, be sure to test this. You're going to want to test this one by one, and this part sucks. Now, I will say this. On an absolutely fresh install of Windows 10, clean and clear installation of Microsoft Flight Simulator, it's really not that bad in regard to load time. So I will tell you that. But the reason why I make that point is that this process sucks. Because the only way to do it correctly is to, just as I said before, make one change, restart the simulator, restart your computer if necessary, whatever it may be. But you can only make one change at a time. Okay? So our first change is going to be what I usually disabled. We'll see what happens. Which is game mode. Let's bring this over here. You can see game mode is currently on. Now, actually, I'm going to take that one step further and back up a little bit more. All right. So we've got 2 choices here. We got a couple things to play with. This is normally a kicker for me in VR. Okay, hardware accelerator GPU scheduling. Okay, again, you'll find that in game mode and graphics settings. Let me back up. One more caveat there. If you have an Nvidia card 20 series or higher, I don't believe this is in the 10 series, but it might be. But I'm positive it's 20 series or higher. And it has to be Nvidia. AMD is something else. I can't remember what it's called, but there is one here for AMD as well on later series cards. Okay. Okay, so reduce latency and improve performance. You'll need to restart your PC in order to have your changes take effect. So we're going to go ahead I'm going to turn this on. Now, here's my hesitancy. You guys can, I'm sure, hear it right now. In VR, this setting destroyed it. Okay? Made me, in both DCS World and in Microsoft Flight Simulator, when I would have this turned on in virtual reality, my headset would lag and frame no matter what my settings were. It took me, this was one that I found actually shortly after Microsoft Flight Simulator launched virtual reality. I had ran into this, and it took me about 4 hours to find this stupid setting. So, by default, normally I turn it off, but we're going to go ahead and turn it on. Then I'm going to restart my PC, and we're going to come back and check things out again and see where we're at. So, stay tuned. All right, so I will tell you this. We're sitting right about the same as where we were. Now, this is actually more like 30 frames per second, what I have discovered. I'm using Streamlabs OBS to do the recording. Ooh. Look at this, though. This is what I was talking about. Let's see if that's knocking it off. Yeah, dude. So we gained about a frame or two. Now, it'd be interesting. I'm getting a little bit of stuttering. But it's also hard to say because my mouse on my main display has been doing some goofy lagging crap. It's part of why I'm moving back to one monitor. I'm getting one big monitor. But I don't think that's related. I think this is part of what I see in VR when I have that setting turned on. So actually, I'm going to go back and I'm going to turn it off. We're also this time, since I've discovered that this is not a setting I want to use, we're also going to turn game mode off. So let's go ahead and get out of here. Game mode is typically something. And people have mixed results. I want to emphasize that. Okay, it's not a 110% every single time game mode sucks. And it is something that seems to be better with time. But I've never found value in it. So first off, that needs to be turned off. Then we're going to also turn game mode off. And now in order for those changes to take effect, I need to reboot again. So I'll be back. Okay. So as you can see here, we're basically right where we were. So no change whatsoever either direction. There's a couple other things I want to change on the outside here. So we're going to exit the sim one more time, check out a couple of other possible Windows settings, and then we're going to come back and start tooling around with the in-game settings. But you always want to start outside of the simulator. Okay, we always want to make sure that the Windows is set up the way we want first, then start working on the sim. So let's get back out onto the desktop. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a peek at a few Windows settings. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to C. Let's see here. I gotta remember where it is. Program files. I haven't had to come in here in a while. Windows apps, and you need to make sure that hidden files are viewable. So let me show you how to do that real quick. Go to View and Hidden Items. Now, I'm going to tell you guys something real quick, okay? Because this is something that comes up in every time that I show this. You guys need to do this at your own risk. And if you don't know what you're doing or you miss a step, I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, you can absolutely bust the crap out of both the simulator and Windows depending on how bad we botch things up, okay? I do this all the time. I'm not too worried about it. So I'm going to go into Properties. I'm going to go to Security. I'm going to go to Advanced. Now you can see that currently the owner is unable to display current owner. We're going to hit Change. And I'm going to type in my username. Overkill. And actually I want the administrator. Well, here, we can just leave it as Overkill. That's fine. And so first, let's check actually our current login. Oops, didn't mean to stop the recording there. So first thing we need to do is we need to verify the user is logged in. How we can do this, right-click your taskbar. This is on Windows 10. Go to Task Manager, go to Users, and you can see Overkill. So capital O, capital K, we want that. Now I'm going to go to Windows Apps. I'm going to go to Properties. And I'm going to go to Advanced. And I'm going to change the owner of this folder. And I'm going to look for Overkill. Hit Enter. All right. And I'm going to replace owner on all subcontainers as well. And I'm going to hit Apply. If you do not feel comfortable doing any of this, don't do it. Okay? You have taken over. You will need to close and reopen this object's properties before you can view changes. Yay! Okay, cool. Whatever. All right. And so now I should be able to access the directory. And there it is. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down and I'm going to find Microsoft Flight Simulator. There it is. Now you can see this is actually only a link to it, which is fine. It's still going to get us where I want to be. And all I'm looking for is the executable. And I'm going to go to Properties. And I'm going to go to Compatibility. And I'm going to disable full screen optimizations. Full screen optimization is something that Windows attempted to implement a long time ago that's supposed to optimize how full screen applications run. In my personal experience, I have never, ever seen it work right. So I disable it on everything. Microsoft Flight Simulator, DCS World, Rust, you name it. I disable it, okay? All right, so we're going to hit Apply. We're going to hit OK. So we're done there in the Windows settings. So now we're going to check out some NVIDIA settings. All right, so to check out NVIDIA settings, we're going to right-click on our desktop, NVIDIA Control Panel. Let me bring this over here. There we go. Manage 3D settings. Oops, there we go. Now we're going to go to Program Settings. We want to actually find Microsoft Flight Simulator. We're going to hit Add. And let's see if I can find it here. There it is right there. And we're going to hit Add Selected Program. And from here, now's where we'll make our changes. Now, I don't mess with too much of this. Honestly, I don't. And I'm sure there are settings that would actually help. But there's quite a few here. Actually, there's a couple here that I'm going to mess with. Okay, prefer maximum performance. I want to make sure that that's on. I typically do leave that globally. Probably shouldn't, but I do. I think that was really the only one that was particularly concerning at this point. Virtual reality frames. You can set that to 2 or 3 if you're in VR. All right, everything else. Application controlled. All right, so that's pretty much the only thing that I checked. So we're already set to use maximum performance. That's what I wanted. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close that at this point. I also want you guys to also remember, nice. I want you guys to remember that I am also using Streamlabs OBS to do my recording. Normally I use Nvidia Shadowplay, but quite frankly, I got so tired of dealing with the audio with it. Like, it was just murder. That's why you guys would have some videos from me where the volume of the aircraft was ridiculously loud, and then other times I was ridiculously loud. And so I moved to Streamlabs OBS where I can actually see what it's doing. Okay, so that is absolutely affecting my frame rates by about 2 to 3 frames per second. So I want you guys to keep that in mind. Whatever FPS is actually showing in the sim, add about 2 or 3 to that. And that's more accurate of what I'm getting outside of recordings. Okay? All right, so let me think here for a second and see if I've got everything done. I think those are the only settings that I was concerned with as far as the simulator. We have game mode disabled, no real performance gain there. We have accelerated GPU performance, no real gain there. That is disabled. It was disabled to begin with when we started, though. We have now disabled full screen optimization. And I think that's it for Windows. I think now we're ready to start playing around with the in-game settings. So let's go ahead and jump back into the sim. Okay. So now it's time to call it as it is. So far, everything I've done hasn't made any difference whatsoever. Now, what we might see is things may be a little smoother, with things like the NVIDIA changes, but the NVIDIA change actually didn't do anything because it was already there. And then like the disabling full screen optimizations, you may see some smoothness increasing from that, but we haven't gained any frames. Which means now the only thing we have left to do is to start downgrading our performance settings. So Let's get into the graphic settings and let's start looking at this. And actually, there's another thing I want to do. Rolling cache is on. Okay, set to 8 gigs. That's totally fine. I just wanted to make sure of that because I do like using it. It does help. And now let's go back to graphics and let's start the process. So now it's a matter of what am I willing to sacrifice. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the texture resolution, kick it down to high, hit apply and save. Now again, this is another one where the sim has to be restarted, so I'll see you in a second. Okay, so even reducing the texture load down, we are still about where we were. It's fluctuating a little bit right now, but it always does when you first load in. But we're still sitting right about where we were. Now we can put our head down, anytime we're looking at the display, it's actually not bad. So we know it's the scenery that's causing the problems. So at this point, now I'm going to go into my general options, go back to the graphics, and we're going to start tweaking some things down. Okay, so let's see here. First thing that I'm going to be looking at here, off-screen terrain pre-caching, I'm going to leave that alone. We have plenty of RAM, plenty of CPU power, so we don't have to touch that. Same thing, terrain vectoring. However, buildings and trees. So we're going to start with trees and grass and bushes. Okay, I'm going to try to leave the buildings as is. We're just going to kick them down to high and see if there's any major change. It doesn't look like there is, which makes sense because there isn't a whole lot around us. But let's let it reload, verify. Okay, doesn't look like anything's changed. If anything, it looks like it went down a hair. So we're going to come back in, and this is how you guys got to do it. All right, this is how it has to be done. Now, I'm also on, I really don't like leaving 16x, but at 4K, I will tell you it's been a slight difference. I need to turn that back on. Only one change at a time. Let's see what we get. No real change at all. And we're just going to keep moving down here. I can tell you right now what it's going to be, but right now I'm going to bring the objects, well, let's see, I want to leave that alone. I want to try to leave those alone right now. Let's take this down to 4x4. Keep moving. Texture synthesis. I'm going to take this down to high. No real change. Water waves, not really worried about that. Shadow maps. Shadows are a big one. Let's take them down one step, see if we gain anything. And none of these are making really any major difference that we're talking about. Now, I do want to see if we can get... Of course, my Windows key will not bring up the Windows toolbar, so give me a second here because it just dawned on me that I'm the one who moved it. But I do want to see our task manager for a second because I want to see what the actual load on the GPU is. Yeah, it's not telling me what the actual... All right, so yeah, let's bring this down to windowed mode for a second. Okay, there's that. I'm going to bring that off the screen. Then we'll come back over here. Back to full screen. Hit OK. Yep, ask me to keep the changes. All right, let's bring Task Manager up. Let's go to Performance. And scroll to the bottom, and we should be able to see the GPU. It says it's pegged. All right, so we're getting plenty of usage out of that GPU, which is good. It's what we want. So I'm going to show you right away off the bat. Let's just skip a couple steps here. We're going to move our texture resolution down, the rendering resolution, and you can see we're already picking up some frames. Now at 4K, I'm going to show you guys this at 90. And I'm going to show you again at 80. I don't typically go below 80. Below 80 is when I really start noticing a difference. But right about 80, I don't notice enough where I complain. All right, so we picked up another few frames, and the screen's also getting smoother. So what we can also do at this point, if you really want to, is we can set this just to high. Do apply. And you can see that now we're in the 40s. Made a pretty significant jump, but look what turned on. Motion blur. So I'm going to go down and get rid of that because I can't stand it. So depth of field, off. And motion blur, definitely off. All the rest of them, you guys can totally leave as you desire. Set them all as you desire. But at 45 frames per second, I'm actually okay with that. Now let's go ahead and finally get the aircraft actually up in the air. Don't mind the flying. I'm literally not even kind of interested in how it's flying right now. Oops, wrong way. Trying to remember all the keyboard commands. I haven't done all my controls yet. All right. So we got our flaps up. I'm trying to keep her over land for right now. And there we go. About 45 to 50 frames per second in the New York area. So now we'll switch over to Tucson and show you guys where kind of areas I normally fly. You always want to start with a heavy load place. And that's the thing, is I'm almost never in an area like that. I really don't. I don't typically fly to the larger airports. I kind of like, ever since I started picking some of the more rural areas, I've really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed sort of discovering some of the more hidden gems of the simulator, if you will. Let's take off from 1-1 left. Departure. Let's hit fly. But it's been a nice experience. It's been fun. So I really don't join the larger airports, especially like New York, very often. Every now and then I like to go out there. So I still want to make sure that my simulator is configured for the larger areas. Because if you're configured for the larger areas, if you're configured for the real dense areas, then you're going to have a really great experience in the smaller, less populated areas. Okay, so let's go ahead and just line up with the runway here. Let's adjust the weather to daytime here. Because the parking brake's on. That's still a bug that's happening. And now I am also noticing that my rudder pedals are not responding. This has been like a new thing. It's been ever since Sim Update 6. I have to constantly turn my rudder pedals on and off to get them to register in the sim. It drives me nuts. All right, inertial separator's on. Cool. So the big thing is I ended up switching to preset of high because I knew that's where we were headed. Okay, so, but I wanted you guys to see the process, and I will still be going through my process. I want you guys to understand that, but I didn't want to make the video 4 million hours long, just 3 million hours. Okay, so I was trying to keep it relatively contained to a more informative, so that you see what the process is, how I do things. That way, if you wanted to walk through it, you at least had an idea of how I went there. But I knew where we were headed. And I will, like I said, I will still be going further in depth at this point. You know, I mean, I'm still only at 50 frames per second. And on Tuesday, I will be going through this all over again because we're moving to a new monitor system. Right now, I'm running 3 4K monitors. And on Tuesday, I will be moving to one 49-inch 1080p monitor. So I'm going to an ultra-wide monitor at 120 hertz and leaving the 4K ones behind for a while. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if that's something that I end up sticking with. I'll be moving one of the 4K monitors over to the racing rig. So that way when we're doing American Truck Simulator or any kind of racing, I want to check out the new Forza. It looks great. We'll have that available. But as you can see, the nice thing that I am seeing that I'm actually pretty stoked about is our frame rate is actually holding about the same as it was over New York. A little bit higher, but really not much to talk about. So anyway, guys, I hope you have found this useful. Make sure that you really test everything out. Find out what's best for your system. If you're curious about my system specs in regard to this, obviously those are down in the description below. You can find those on any one of my videos. So anyway, like I said, I really hope that you guys found this useful. Maybe picked up a tip or trick or two. But anyways, I hope you guys all have a wonderful week, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, folks.